This is a promotional podcast for EIS Platforms Limited Trading as Growth Invest. Any comments made or opinions expressed in this podcast should not be construed as investment advice or a financial promotion. Startups and early stage businesses are high-risk investments and you are unlikely to be protected if something goes wrong. Don't invest unless you are prepared to lose all your money. Hello and welcome to Alternative Thinking with me, Melissa Griffiths.
And me, Steve Dobson.
This is the podcast that takes a deeper dive into the alternative marketplace and topical issues. We're delighted today to be joined by Sam Smith, and we're going to look at the startup industry and ecosystem in the UK. Lovely to see you, Sam.
Very nice to be here.
So, Sam, we normally kick off with a bit of a career to date, a bit of a bio on where you've been.
Okay, so I started off age 23, left KPMG, worked for a wealth manager to set up their brand new corporate finance division. So obviously I didn't have a clue what I was doing. It was a desk, a phone and me, and I built that division over 10 years to about 3 million revenue. Was quite successful, didn't realise I was an entrepreneur. And then we led a buyout because we wanted to continue to grow and become what's called a nominated advisor on the stock market for AIM companies. And 2007 we bought out just before the financial crisis and spent the next 10 years building that business organically to beyond 50 million of revenue and became the leading advisor to AIM companies. We had 120 odd companies we acted for. We then did an IPO ourselves in 2018 and bought Cavendish Corporate Finance, which was a leading M&A house.
Yeah. And
I stepped down 24 years after that.
Wow.
23-year-old, not knowing what I was doing, feeling fairly like I knew what I was doing, but felt there was another challenge there. So September 22, I left, and now I have a different form of career. I have a sort of plural career, more portfolio. I have 5 non-execs.
Yeah.
I act as entrepreneur in residence for a couple of scale-ups, which I'm really excited about. And I've also launched the Superscalers, which is a new business, which I launched with my co-founder, Rosaline Blair, in September, which I'm sure we'll talk more about.
Sure.
Yes.
Can I just jump in very quickly?
Yes.
You made a really interesting comment there. You said, I didn't realise I was an entrepreneur.
Yes.
When did you?
So, in fact, I was talking about this weekend. I think age 33, just after I completed the buyout, so 10 years after I was building the division, I was almost the accidental CEO. We bought out the division and it was a bit, okay, you be the CEO. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a...
You almost fell into it.
I just fell into it.
Yeah.
And I thought the CEO role of FinCat was going to be exactly the same as the divisional head within a bigger business. And it wasn't.
No.
And I sort of had that realisation within about 2 months, thinking, oh my God, what have I done? Do I like this? And I think then I finally realised that I was an entrepreneur, but only because I met so many people who were leading other businesses, our competitors. And I describe it as like having that last piece of the jigsaw puzzle fitted into place. So all through my schooling, which is why I'm so passionate about entrepreneurship in schools, I didn't feel like I fitted. I kept throughout my career, felt like I fitted in more and more, but that last little jigsaw, when I met entrepreneurs that spent all their life thinking about disruption and change and how to do things and didn't want to just go home at 5:30 and watch the TV. I thought, oh, there are other people like this. I thought I was a bit strange. And so I call it finding my tribe.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that was amazing because it was like click, 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 and the Rubik's
Light bulb
Cube's
moment,
done.
yeah.
And I suddenly sort of had confidence that, oh, this is me. I am an entrepreneur. And
Yes.
then it carried on.
Which actually leads us nicely onto Superscalers, where you're very passionate, aren't you,
Yes.
about trying to sort of keep scale-ups moving through the ecosystem and actually going into Superscalers, which you see as when there's over 50 million of revenue. Can you explain a bit about the sort of Superscaler concept? And
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think my investment banking career, we were advising a lot of entrepreneurs. So my skill set was helping entrepreneurs go through a transaction, get from A to B. But it wasn't the technical stuff. It was the personal stuff behind that. It was why they were doing something, what they were worried about, which was never the rule book or, putting the technicals in place or even raising the money. It was losing control. Yep. It was thinking about, oh my God, what are my staff going to think? Oh my God, I'm a public company. What am I going to do? Is that putting me out in the public domain? So that's been my whole career, is working with entrepreneurs. So I know it's such a key driver of growth. It's, one of my favourite things. to talk about and to listen to and to read about all the time. But what I started to see is how inclusive it could be. So actually, anyone can be an entrepreneur. You don't even need a lot of money at the beginning, and actually underrepresented founders bootstrap. So they're using their own profits from their business to reinvest in growth. So they're not even raising money, and actually they can come from any region of the country, any background. It's very any age. Anyone can do it if you just have an idea. So that's sort of the background to it. So I've always believed in it. The Superscalers came up because as I left FinCat, now Cavendish, and had 2 years of looking at non-execs, and I have one VCT, and then I have one listed company, one private equity-backed company, and a bootstrap company. So all different ways of sort of growing a business. And I sat there and kept getting asked the question, how do we sort of champion women IPOing?
Yes.
How do we champion? And I'm also a judge of Entrepreneur of the Year. We had Trinny Woodall come through and she won. But we didn't really have many other contenders that were women. I think we had one other, Absolute Collagen. And we said, why is this? So the question kept coming back over 2 years, because I had IPO'd, one of the few women who has.
Well, and you came up, didn't you? There was the EY report where there was 45
well, that's
women
why
that were
we did the
identified.
report.
Yes.
So at the final judging panel, sort of the Entrepreneur of the Year, the awards were there, and we were all sitting down going, how do we sort of get more women to enter? And the answer was, well, it kept coming back to, you probably need to be a significant size to IPO, to be private equity backed, to enter this competition and have a good chance of winning. So all these answers came back to, well, the question we're trying to sort of the answer to the problem is, the question is, how many have we got to work with?
Yeah.
No one knew. So for a year I was running around going, why does no one know how many women in the UK have built a business to 50 million revenue? I know I have. I knew Rosaline, my business partner, had built it way past 50 million.
Trinny.
And Trinny had gone way past 50 million. But I saw they were the only three I knew. How do we not know more? So persuaded EY to go and find the data. A year later, they find the data.
Which is a fascinating report.
It's amazing. And then at the same time, the Scale Up Institute that I work with, they were cutting data on the fast growth businesses who have got to 10 million turnover that are female founded, and they looked at 10 million, 20, 30, 40, 50. Yeah. So at about the same time, both these reports came together. So it's actually 80 is the number. So 80, if you look at the two combined reports, are the number of women who've built a business past 50 million revenue.
Right.
But of the 80, 63 are fast growth scale-ups. So they're growing at 20% a year consistently for 3 years. The rest have taken a very long time to get there. So EY's report showcases 45 because they really had to go into, is this a female founder? The female founder had to want to go into the report or be okay about going into the report. Because it's quite hard to decipher and really go back as who is the real founder at the beginning. Yeah. Because the data at Companies House is not totally clear. So we think it's 80. And at that point, I think this is one tiny, but how am I going to do something about this? So that's when the Superscalers idea was born. It's like, right, we need to make it our mission to double this number. And actually, if we want to change the way influence and power works, and we want underrepresented groups and more diverse thinking, we want a seat at the table. Yeah. If we want to be in the room when decisions are made and change the way decisions are made, our best input is to try and help underrepresented founders build really big businesses. Yeah. Because at that level, not only can you IPO, get PE backed, go global, you get a significant voice. Your voice starts to matter. You've got market share. You become relevant in terms of how decisions are made, and people ask for your view. So I see that as doubling the number of women, but we've also now worked with all underrepresented groups, so from social background, race, disability, neurodiversity, all those groups where you feel like the system doesn't work for you. We want to help all those founders collapse the time to superscale. So make it as fast as possible. You have to be £1 million to enter the community. But we will take you from 1 million right the way through to 50 and beyond as quickly as possible. And our job as the Superscalers is to help you navigate that system that is so complex and so full of jargon, particularly the funding landscape. We can demystify that, because that's been my job. for such a long time and open up all our networks.
Yes,
so it's very exciting.
Yeah, brilliant. And one thing I found fascinating and staggering was some statistics that came out of the EY report that female-founded companies in the UK only receive 2p for every pound invested, and actually compared to male only founded businesses, which are at 84p. I mean, that's staggering to me. I mean, it just shows the underrepresentation and the lack of confidence possibly in women, which you can hopefully change.
And it's not really, the dial isn't moving. It's not really shifting. And that's part of the problem. Whereas we see the numbers of women scaling up businesses to a decent size is growing exponentially.
Yeah.
So if I look at a little bit of data from the Scale Up Institute, they'd found these 63 women had built to 50 million. But when we dialed back to 10 million, and we started tracking this since 2019, in 19 we had less than 200 women who'd built a business to 10 million revenue. Wow. I mean, that is tiny, isn't it? Yes. This year we had 740.
Yeah.
So yes, the number's still small, but that is exponential growth, and that's because women are coming through the system because it takes a long time to scale.
Yeah.
And they set up businesses, 10 years ago, and the average time to build a business past 10 million is over 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you're starting to see things coming through. So if I could get all those 10 million businesses through to 50,
the next stage, yeah.
That's 750. That's a 10x multiple on the number. And at that point, 10 times the number of women who've built something great, who've understood the challenges and who can collectively say, what were your issues? How did you do it? What can we help learn for the next generation coming through? That's when we can start to make real change.
Which is actually interesting, moving on to sort of the next generation and creating entrepreneurial spirit amongst the youngsters. I was watching a podcast recently where they described Gen Z as a quite overprotected, very consumed in social media, and they had a real fear of failure. And that seems something that is a bit of a problem with the next generation, isn't it? To actually go and take the risk to be an entrepreneur. I know, Steve, you were interested, weren't you?
I think that, again, you mentioned earlier about the curriculum and bringing it into the curriculum. We've all got children. Mine, eldest is at university, their second year, younger one's doing A-levels now, but they've not really had entrepreneurial or really kind of financial savvy education through my wife's a teacher in the primary school. They just don't. Our system, our curriculum seems to be very, very fixed and not changed for many, many years. And yet it seems like something that we should just be incorporating and just instilling in our youngsters now.
Absolutely. And I think what I've seen is firsthand what it does.
Yeah.
So, myself, as I said, I didn't think I was an entrepreneur till 33.
Yeah.
No.
But I had no idea that the way I thought was different. And at school, I had a horrible time at school. I didn't like it. I was really shy. I probably felt, really unseen for a very long time. So I felt it, and I think that's why it became my passion project. But at FinCat, we would support entrepreneurship into primary schools. That was our first sort of CSR, giving back money. So we went in and we got up to 70 schools in the end, working with a great lady called Donna Irving, who had a business called Stepping Into Business. And we put a 3-week course on entrepreneurship into primary schools. And over time, at the end of this 3 weeks, she'd do a Dragon Den style pitch. Yeah. She'd see the kids all presenting. And at the end of these, you go to all these schools and you think, this is amazing. These kids are fantastic.
And I bet they're so engaged as well.
Not just in what they're saying, but how they're presenting. And so we started to dig into what the schools thought about this, because it was quite hard to get into the schools, to persuade the schools to even do it, even though it was free. And the consistent theme came back that the head teachers would say is, right, this has been great, but what's surprised us is this is engaging the children that were basically written off.
Oh, really?
They thought were disruptive, weren't engaged, were getting really
Goes back
bad
to exactly
grades,
what you said at the start.
might have been considered lazy, just really disruptive.
Academic in
ADHD,
that sort of system.
all those issues. And suddenly, they just weren't doing well at all. Suddenly on the entrepreneurship course, they lit up.
Yeah.
Wow.
They would be amazing. And then from my stance, I'm looking at them thinking, age 10, who would I think about employing? It was not the ones who were getting the great grades.
No.
It was these kids that were just amazing at presenting. They had the gift of the gab. They could sell. they just had that savviness.
Yes.
You know, they could build a team, they could lead. And actually, it's really interesting when we went back and did research, there's very similar characteristics of an entrepreneur that are very similar to a criminal in a lot of ways. In terms of a gang leader is really, really entrepreneurial.
Yeah, well, you can.
So you think about the social benefit of entrepreneurship. Not only might you find the next Steve Jobs or Richard Branson, but you're actually helping kids that have this skill set go and use it in a great direction because they feel like someone believes in them, there's something they're great at. Rather than worst case scenario, their skill set is very suitable for something that's completely illegal and not great for society. So it went down from, oh my God, this is engaging great entrepreneurial talent to build business, but it's also creating skills that can help those people succeed, because you can be an entrepreneur within a bigger business, just to feel like they've got a talent.
Yes.
So
Find
and
your
that's
niche.
hugely important, that you don't feel written off and then give up. And down to the real, massive issue of how do you stop crime? How do you stop that happening? And I believe it's all belief, it's growth mindset, it's helping someone find their skill. And entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial thinking in schools, I think, would just make everyone believe they could be good at something.
Yes, which is
not
so
just
important.
academics.
Exactly. And not everyone's going to follow that academic route all the way through university.
And nor
there
should
has to
they.
be options, And they need to know that these options exist, and that's the problem. Without it in the curriculum, they not necessarily know that there's an option to do this.
Yeah, so I've got a talk now which I'm trialling at my daughter's school called The Power of Thinking Differently.
Oh, brilliant.
And it's very interesting. All I'm talking about is why it's so important to think in a different way, and why is that's going to be your superpower.
Yeah.
So all the big inventions in history, the internet, when the internet was first coming out, everyone said it wasn't going to work. Or the microcomputer, everyone said no one's going to have a microcomputer on every desk. What are you on about? Actually, it's someone who has the passion to go, well, I believe in this.
Yes,
So
and drive it
every invention, every new idea, when it was invented, everyone said it was wrong. So if we don't, get that belief, that fear of failure,
Exactly. It goes back to the
overcome,
failure piece,
we won't disrupt, we won't innovate, we won't solve problems, we won't create a better society.
Yeah. What do you see the areas where you would recommend that founders start looking at to get this super scale? There's an awful lot available, but it's very fragmented, and it doesn't really sort of gel together. And you've got to have a lot of knowledge. And so obviously we're very much in the tax efficient space, and Steve is on ESA. But it's understanding, you've got, unless you're in the financial world, you wouldn't necessarily know where to go or what's that on offer, would you?
And this is the start of the problem.
Yeah.
So there's a good ecosystem around startup and accelerators. We're second in the world for starting up. We do startups pretty well, even though it's quite fragmented. What happens and why we deal at 1 million revenue as a starting point is you've done that startup, you've done the hard yards, you've done it generally on your own. What happens then is you need confidence and a growth mindset and a network and role models who can help you believe you can get to that next stage. And if you are an underrepresented founder, so anyone who thinks the system wasn't really built for them, you start off with no network. You're starting from scratch. You don't know anyone that's built something. A bit really like Rosaline and I started, and Trini as well. We were just doing it, making up as we go along. But that's really hard. So the Superscalers is the community, the curated community of how do we show you where everything is. But we always start with mindset. So the biggest thing is, when you're trying to scale a business, you have to understand businesses don't scale linearly. No. They scale exponentially. So if you've got to 1 million turnover, you have doubled so many times to get to 1 million. The doubling process becomes easier because it takes the same amount of time really to double. So once you got to 1, you were looking at going 2, 4, 8, 16 quite quickly. At 16, you're going to 32, 64, suddenly you're over 100 million. And just this concept of exponential growth, it's like once you can double a business, even from 50 grand to 100 grand of revenue, you know what's going on, you know how to scale, you're off. As soon as anywhere in that journey you can double, you found, almost the secret sauce. You just have to keep going. So this concept of exponential growth, plus the concept of you always need to look a couple of journeys, doubling journeys ahead, was revolutionary to our founders.
Right.
And that surprised me, because I've been in an ecosystem
Yeah.
where I've advised hundreds and hundreds of companies, and you just see these patterns emerge. I thought it was obvious that once you got to 5 million, you're clearly not going to go to 5.2 million turnover. You're going to go quickly to 10. Probably to you, that's quite obvious, because you see, VCTs and, they're backing companies that aren't going from 1 million revenue to 1.1. They're going very sharply to 10 million.
Yeah.
So this concept just means everyone then can believe this. Oh, well, I've got the formula. It's not scary, because otherwise it is too scary. Thinking, I've done all this hard yards to get to 1. I'm almost half dead.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've been doing everything. Everyone's knackered. It's the worst bit of time. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do after setting up, is getting to 1 million. Actually, it becomes easier. You can pull yourself back out of the business if you want, bring in professional management. You can be exec chair, you can not be in it at all, but you can still create a great business.
Yes.
So that concept is quite
The game changer. Really.
quite game changing
Yeah.
for those founders who are not aware of it.
Yeah.
Then we get into funding, access to funding. Where can you go? What's a VCT? What's EIS? How do you get angels? And then we can put all the fragmented information together and direct people to the right place. But that is the secondary piece to the fundamentals of understanding scaling, exponential growth, why it happens, who's done it, and show them loads of examples about this is real, I'm not just making it up.
Yeah.
And then when they meet someone at the next stage who's been all through those same challenges, they realise, oh my God, they're just like me.
Yes.
That is the ultimate game changer.
Yeah.
That you say, oh, you had exactly the same problems at 2 million. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
No one knows what they're doing at 2 million.
No.
No.
Other than those who are highly networked, have got, maybe parents that are entrepreneurs, or that, they're in with a crowd that know it. Well, that's
Yes.
great for them, but that isn't how a lot of founders
No, and a lot of people with
work.
the hunger and drive don't have that ecosystem around them naturally, do they? Sometimes at the
No,
beginning.
not at
So,
all.
No.
So us providing that, and that's why we've also got Ollie Barrett now as founder, who is, I think, probably the most networked guy in startup and scale up. He knows everybody. He is going to be brilliant at just helping people navigate that system and just go, right, you need to know that person. Okay, here's the intro. So I think what we're doing at Superscalers is going to be really, really powerful. Our vision is to create the largest global community of underrepresented founders with over 1 million of turnover. So it's a massive vision, because I think globally, when you can connect a person who's built a £50 million business to another one, what happens? Quite a lot. So I'm very excited about where it could go, and it's a belief. It's all about the belief.
Yes. Yeah.
So I was reading on the Entrepreneurs Network webpage about how the UK, and I think it's widely considered to be a very good place to start up a business, but it commented about to scale up is difficult. It's not considered so well. And then also VCTA did a survey across scale-up businesses, and they found that the biggest issue was access to capital to do the scale-up. Now, we work in the industry very much in the tax-efficient space, where there's these amazing products. UK has these super beneficial products for people to invest into. So why do you think we've still got this issue of this access to capital to do that scale-up piece?
So I think underrepresented founders specifically that I'm looking at scale in a different way.
Yeah.
And weirdly, when you look at family businesses, they scale very similarly. So if you think of the outset, why is someone building a business? Their motivation is about long term. It's about legacy. So therefore, they build slower, slightly less risk. They want to iterate, but they're building an amazingly sustainable business. But what happens is when you're building like that, and that's of my 100 women in my community at the moment, is pretty much 95% have built like that. So anecdotally, that's what's happening. You have this funding gap. So they're too small for private equity.
Yeah.
But they're not fast enough growth rates in a quick enough time scale for a VC. And it probably wouldn't be that suitable even if you said, right, you can have VC money, because VC is take a £5 to £10 million check, get it to a 10x in 5 years, thanks very much. For a founder that if you think, to me, I would have been petrified. I know this market backwards, but would I have raised VC money to put myself under pressure to deliver 10x in 5 years?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that would have blown my mind. And I think I'm quite a good entrepreneur. So yes, I built a business over 50 million, but I wanted to do it in my own way, in my own style. So yes, we raised IPO money after 20 years. We only raised 5 million when we IPO'd. We could have used venture capital trust money, but we never would have gone VC. So that's the same place that a lot of these founders are in, is that there's a gap. The gap can be filled by EIS and VCT and angels. And then you look at, well, do you even understand the difference between a venture capital trust and VC? Because they sound a bit the same.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, they don't.
No.
So when I was on the high-led Women's Growth Task Force for the government with Anne Bowden chairing it 18 months ago, we looked at this and the stats were unbelievable. It was like the number of women who don't know about EIS, it was like something like 80+%. So one of our recommendations was all MPs, find out who your female startups and scale-ups are and just write them a letter, just explaining what it is.
Wow.
So that went out as a start. So those numbers can start moving, but it's not well known.
No,
it's not.
Again,
It's not.
It's a lack of education,
because
really.
you're not in a system.
No.
So for us, we think, why don't you go for EIS money? That's an obvious one because it's a great tax break. You know, VCTs.
You've just spoken a foreign language, though.
Yeah, they look at profitable businesses or very early stage businesses that may be slightly slower growth, but are great businesses that will scale. They're looking at you like this is a whole new concept.
Yeah.
So we don't talk in language that is very
Relatable.
easy for a founder. If you think any advisor, any fund is scary, that EI already it's the 3-letter word, which
Finance
is like,
loves an acronym.
what's that?
Yeah.
So it's so many acronyms, so much to understand. So I think that piece, the understanding, is one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
So that's something that is just about promotion and understanding and bridging that gap between people who need the funding and those funders. Plus, then there's all the other thing about how you incentivize more money going to VCTs and changing the rules, because my big bugbear at the moment is it's a 7-year rule. And actually, my businesses I'm looking at in my community take a long time. Like
longer.
I said, average to get to 10 million, 10 years.
10 years.
Some of them might take 10 years to get to 1 or 2 million.
Yeah.
Just because the nature of they're doing it on their own. So why should you, whenever you want to scale, be penalised because it's taken you 7 years to get there?
I think this came up in the recent podcast we did with the
where everyone
VCTs.
was saying it's patient capital, isn't it? And you have to be patient. Yes, and I do think that is something. Well, actually, yes, it is patient capital, but this moves us a bit more onto capital markets, which obviously I'm quite keen to get in as well, because I know I saw yesterday you actually liked a LinkedIn post which was talking about IPOs, and I feel, and we talk regularly, don't we, on the podcast, about one of the big problems with the UK capital markets at the moment is lack of IPOs and a demand as well in venture capitalism and scaling up, that people do want to see exits, and there is this sort of patient capital, but I think people feel they also want to not be in for too long, and there should be opportunities, particularly in the sectors that are often really going from strength to strength. I was reading that it's like TMT all coming back again, AI, crypto potentially. They're marketplaces that they need a lot of cash, and therefore IPOs should be a natural way for them to progress. Yet in the UK, we've hardly seen any IPOs over the last sort of couple of years. We're way behind the world, really. What do you think is one of the big problems in capital markets at the moment, and why we're not getting this traction?
Well, there are a lot, and I'll talk about the biggest one. But I think the background, I've been doing this for 25 years, IPOing businesses. We did a campaign called Ambition Nation going around the country talking about them to scale up entrepreneurs. Again, like the knowledge of EIS and VCT, no knowledge.
Yeah.
So everyone, I think, thought IPOs somewhere out there, they roughly know what it is, but it's not to do with me. I'll do a different funding route. So just the basic understandings of why is an IPO so great? Well, our biggest pitch was you get to run your business still. You're in control. And any other capital that you raise, you're probably giving away a majority stake. They're probably on your board and they are getting very, very active. Yeah. And generally, they might get rid of the CEO.
Yeah.
The stats are quite high.
Yeah.
Whereas IPO is like, you've got loads of shareholders.
Yeah.
No one's controlling you. Actually, if you're doing well, they're really happy to see you twice a year. Go, thanks very much.
Yes.
And that's the extent of the involvement. So if you are a growth business and you're doing well and you can manage expectations in the market, there is no better way to get funding until you start digging into the reasons then, once you know about it, why you don't.
Yeah.
And they fall to, I think, liquidity and how people can get compensated. One of the biggest issues before liquidity has become a very big issue was pay. So if you think about private equity backing, you could get very big equity incentives for management and the team, which is what you need. If you're going to go out and scale something and put your everything on the line to go and build it, you need to be rewarded. Yeah. And that does happen in the US. So in the UK, because you've got agencies that are starting to say you've got to vote that down and you can't have more than 10% option pools and you can't reward that CEO, that bigger figure, everyone will go mad. Actually, you're not going to go that route.
No.
So I think sorting that out and making sure we can do compensation very well, and that's from CEOs right through to non-execs. So I'm a non-exec of one listed company. The pay is terrible against a PE. You can't have equity. So how do you bring really talented people in at scale without paying people? You're just not going to do it. No. So pay and equity really, really fundamental. Yeah, because that was the big reason every time that someone said, I'd rather have IPO'd, but I went to PE because the differential in my equity package is 100% different. Yeah. So that's just common sense. Then when you look at liquidity, which since I left has got worse and worse and worse, then you say, which is Lisa Gordon, chair of Cavendish Financial, has just gone on the Capital Markets Task Force. She is passionate about this. How do we get more people to invest in the UK stock market, particularly AIM and our scale-up businesses? Yes. And if you start looking at the data, from years ago, we were probably 30-40% owners within our pension funds and insurance companies of our own stock market.
Yeah, now it's 4%.
Now it's 4%.
Yeah. I mean, it's staggering.
But then you look at America and Canada, it's 40, 50, 60%. Yeah. So most other countries back their own stock markets. Yes. With their own pension insurance money. We don't. No. So lots of reasons why that is, but we need to turn that round. So if we're not backing our own businesses,
why should anyone else? Yeah.
We've got to create that liquidity pool. So I think the British Growth Partnership, which is the British Business Bank have launched, getting that regulatory approved and going to invest in our scale-up companies, but including AIM on that would be amazing. Getting pension funds and insurance companies to start looking at risk and saying this, you need to make return. We can't just be all in gilts. Yeah. No. We need to be a small percentage, but we need to be in different things. Consolidating the council pension funds, which is happening at the moment. Scale means you can take more risk at the small end. Yeah. So without impacting returns. So that's really going to be a massive driver if it all gets directed at public companies. Yeah. So the wealth fund, all of those things I think are massive interventions, but they need to be done quickly. Yes. Because liquidity is drying up.
It is.
Outflows have been going on for 3 years out of UK funds. They're getting smaller and smaller, and therefore they get a smaller and smaller voice at the table within a fund management company of, you're the UK fund, well, it's so tiny, we don't, it's irrelevant. Yeah. So we need to reverse the changes really, really fast. But I believe there's something we can do.
There's something coming out, isn't there? The Financial Services Growth and Competitive Strategy. It's coming out in spring, I think, in 2025. I mean, I think that's going to be quite detailed in what they're doing to try and sort of, improve things at a policy level as well, isn't it? To try and get...
I think the penny has dropped. Sometimes things only get solved when you get to rock bottom. And I feel like, we are at rock bottom. Yep. The numbers are small. January, yes, we did have a big IPO, a US company IPO'd. We had our first AIM IPO of the year. Yes. So, things are happening, so that's good. But we are at, rock bottom, which needs intervention now. Yeah. Not next week, not 2 weeks, not next year. And I think, number 11 are really realising...
Under pressure to... Yeah.
That's happening. The whole community is saying that this is now or never. Yeah. We're going to have no capital markets at all if we don't intervene now. And capital markets is such an important part of the ecosystem. So if you think about how it goes, yes, you start up, then you scale up, then you get to superscale, 50 million, and then you go on to become a unicorn, and then you've got IPO, and then that money exits, and then it goes back into the system. You can't not have a functioning IPO market. And as someone called it, said, it's our shop window. That is our shop window to the world. So if we want to be open for business, we need to do it now.
And we've got to make it attractive for companies to stay here, because there's too many crossing the pond to go to the US, because it's more lucrative for them over there, and understandably so. So you're right, we have to make changes now. There's lots of talk from the government. It's all about growth, but we've got to see actions now to make it happen.
Well, and we also had Callum Pickering on, who was talking about a catalyst as well to kind of, because the UK is undervalued really, and there is an awful lot of opportunity if we can just get the right catalyst. Secure economics, people believing and backing it, and not wanting to move. I mean, it would make a big difference if we can get it right. It could really change things for the UK.
And at least we have a stable landscape now. If you think about the last, for all CEOs, I think in 2022, when I stepped down, in 2024 last year, there's been the highest level of CEOs leaving that there's ever been in history. And you can see why, because the market, we've had a lot of change.
Yes.
Keeping up is very, very exhausting when you're running something. So why are people going to invest in the UK if we can't keep up running our own businesses with the chopping and changing and Brexit and COVID and government changes and new prime minister here, there and everywhere, and it's been a nightmare, hasn't it?
Yes.
If you're running a business with no stability at all.
No.
At least, yes, some of the things we can argue about what they've done, not being very pro-growth, but we know what we're dealing with now, and there is a period of time that I think there is a bit more stability. So we've got a base to work with at least. And I think something just to plug for Scale Up Britain, which is something that me and Irene at the Scale Up Institute came up with a couple of years ago, which is now in full flow, and the London Stock Exchange are supporting it, where they're going around to regions to scale up businesses to really promote this idea of ambition and scaling. So Scale Up Britain, what I'd like to see is it becoming a bigger campaign that we need to champion. So saying, scaling up, we were Startup Britain and we're still great at Startup Britain.
Yes,
but
it's that middle
Britain,
bit, isn't it?
We need to keep businesses in the UK. We need to incentivise them to scale and super scale. And just putting that infrastructure in place would change growth and productivity pretty fast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's been amazing, Sam. I think we've covered a lot, but I mean, hopefully, like we've all said, it's going to be the time for change, and hopefully going in the right direction for the UK. So, thank you very much, Sam.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Very informative.
Perfect. Thank you. To hear more, tune in to either YouTube on video or all good podcast channels.